Hi, and welcome to Hacker's Misadventures in Scale Modeling, Feature Friday. Today we're going to be looking at the de Havilland Vampire that was in Royal Canadian Air Force service. Now, the only video I found on the Vampire was from Dark Skies. Well, I don't think it's the only video, but it's the one I like. And I thought I'd run that one. Then I have one of a Royal Canadian Air Force Vampire in a museum. So let's go over and watch our video for today.
Aviation engineers at de Havilland came up with a remarkable type,
By the way,
second only to the renowned Gloucester Meteor, the Vampire. The iconic aircraft was not only the second jet fighter to join the ranks of the Royal Air Force, but it was also the very first to be powered by a single jet engine. Back in May of 1944, the RAF made the decision to produce the Vampire as an interceptor aircraft, and within 2 years, it was already in operational service. With its sleek twin-boom design and powerful single engine, the Vampire quickly made a name for itself in the aviation world as it took off to the skies, ready to achieve numerous aviation firsts and break several records. Straight through. The end of World War II was a fascinating time for military aviation, marked by a race to develop the first operational jet fighter. At the forefront of this technological competition were the Germans and the British, an unspoken arms race that led to the development of two iconic types, the Messerschmitt Me-262 and the Gloucester Meteor. Still, the roots of one of Britain's most successful post-war fighters can be traced back to 1914. Sir Henry Tizard, a prominent figure in aviation history, approached de Havilland with a bold proposal to develop a new fighter using revolutionary jet engine technology. Having access to Frank Whittle's pioneering work on gas turbines, Major Frank Hatford, an aero engine designer at de Havilland, decided to develop a straight-through centrifugal engine, the Halford H1, later renamed the de Havilland Goblin. It was capable of generating 3,000 pounds of thrust, which was considered high at the time. A modern F-35's turbofan generates around 43,000 pounds of thrust. After completing the design work on the engine in April 1941, the first prototype was tested a year later. The new de Havilland Goblin engine began to rectify the issue of low power outputs for early jet engines. For the first time, it was possible to consider single-engine aircraft. And while the company is best known for its wooden wonder, the beloved Mosquito, the aircraft they would design around the Goblin would become one of their most famous designs. When in doubt. The success of the Gloucester Meteor soon caught the attention of the aviation world. Naturally, de Havilland Aircraft Company was approached to design and construct an airframe for the DH Goblin's turbojet engine. The company initially developed the so-called Spider Crab, otherwise known as DH-99, an all-metal twin-boom tricycle undercarriage aircraft armed with 4 cannons. Its unorthodox arrangement of twin rear booms, mounted behind the egg-shaped wood and aluminum fuselage and a single engine, was considered highly experimental at the time. Still, using a twin boom allowed for a shorter jet pipe, avoiding the power loss that a longer pipe would cause in a conventional fuselage. The tailpipe was also free from interference from the exhaust. But the Ministry of Aircraft Production had doubts. The design's lack of detail and the overly optimistic structure weight seemed far-fetched, but the ministry nonetheless permitted it to proceed in July 1941. In response to ministry recommendations and to maximize the efficiency of the new technology, the design was modified into a mixed wood and metal construction, which was then redesignated as the DH-100 Vampire. The first prototype DH-100 Vampire, serial LZ554-8G, took its maiden flight on September 20th, 1943 at Hatfield, flown by Geoffrey R. de Havilland, son of the company founder. The Vampire's twin-boom design was a rarity among fighters and was unlike any other jet at the time. The P-38 Lightning was the only other fighter to feature a twin-boom design prior to the Vampire's introduction.
Actually, that's not true. The Saab 20 and 21. Now, Saab 20, I think I got the number right, was had the twin boom design, but it had a piston engine in behind, and then they swapped that out and put a jet engine in it. So it wasn't the only one, the only jet that had a twin boom design.
Went into production the following year, missing active war service by a thin hair. A favorite. Due to production pressures and capacity limitations at Hatfield, the English Electric Company at Wharton had to step in and produce the first production DH Vampire. Despite arriving after the end of the war, the aircraft was highly anticipated and became the second British jet fighter to serve with the Royal Air Force, or RAF. In fact, it was given the privilege of leading the flypast over London during the VE Day celebrations. On June 8, 1946, Fighter Command's 247th Squadron introduced the Vampire to the British public as they led the flypast. The aircraft had a unique design, with its twin tailboom and pod-like fuselage, making it easy to recognize both in the air and from the ground. It was also highly versatile and set many aviation records, including being the first RAF fighter to exceed a top speed of 500 miles per hour. The Vampire's impressive capabilities were due to its powerful Goblin engine, which allowed it to reach a top speed of 548 miles per hour and have a service ceiling of 42,800 feet. The aircraft quickly became a favorite among pilots, especially after Captain Eric Winkle Brown successfully landed and took off from an aircraft carrier using a Sea Vampire in December 1945, making it the first true jet aircraft to achieve this feat. Later on, the Vampire's first active combat experience followed, which took place during the Malayan emergency of the late 1940s and early 1950s, in which communists fought for Malaya's independence and a socialist economy, while the Malayan Federation and Commonwealth forces fought to protect British interests. It was used in various ground attack missions. Later versions of the jet were also deployed to the Middle East and Africa. Likewise, the Vampire briefly saw service in 1954 against Mau Mau insurgents, the culminating response to British colonial rule in Kenya. Eventually, technological advancements surpassed the aircraft's capabilities. Nevertheless, the DH Vampire significantly contributed to the development of British aviation. Common interests. The primary production version of the aircraft was the de Havilland Vampire FB-5 fighter bomber, a modified version of the DH Vampire F-3. This variant was also used as the basis for many of the export versions. In addition to the fighter bomber, separate night fighter and trainer models were produced as the DH-113 Vampire NF and the DH-115 Vampire Trainer, respectively. The Vampire was not only a land-based aircraft, it was also modified for shipboard use, given that the Royal Navy modified the type for carrier-based operations and called it the Sea Vampire. On December 3, 1945, Captain Eric Winkle Brown successfully landed and took off from a jet fighter from the carrier HMS Ocean. This was the Royal Navy's first jet fighter, and it was a significant achievement. An experimental version of the DH Vampire, featuring an extended wingspan and a DH Ghost engine, set a world altitude record of 59,446 feet in March 1948. Later that year, 6 Vampire F-3s became the first jet fighters to fly across the Atlantic for an RAF Goodwill tour of Canada. On the other hand, the Vampire was a popular aircraft in the export market, with around 30 air forces ultimately operating the type. After witnessing its agility and prowess in the fighter and attack roles, other air forces were interested in the Vampire's capabilities. In 1946, the Royal Australian Air Force purchased 50 DH-100 Vampire F-1, F-2, and F-B variants, most of them built with Goblin engines. However, the second aircraft was built for the Rolls-Royce Nîmes power plant. Australia was one of the aircraft's main external users, deploying it in various forms until the early 1970s, while France produced their own version of the Vampire, called the Mistral. Many other countries were export users, such as Norway, Rhodesia, Sweden, and Mexico, where it was nicknamed Avocado for its shape and color scheme. The DH Vampire remained a frontline fighter for the Royal Air Force until the early 1950s, after which it was retained only in the pilot training and refresher role. Nevertheless, the aircraft had surprising popularity in several air forces worldwide, with large numbers still in service in the 1980s. The Swiss Air Force was the last Vampire user, retiring their sizable fleet of DH Vampire FB-6s and T-55s from active service as late as 1990. Flying into the sunset. The Vampire's distinctive look and twin-boom design became a signature of de Havilland's other aircraft. While this type of design was rare in jet fighters, the Vampire proved to be a more than decent fighter and served with the RAF until 1966. In Britain, the Air Ministry recognized that the Vampire was quickly becoming outdated, especially compared to its rival, the Gloucester Meteor. The Meteor 8 version proved superior to the de Havilland jet, leading to the Vampire's withdrawal from frontline service in 1953. However, the RAF continued to use the Vampire in advanced training roles until 1966, when it was ultimately replaced by the full-length Gnat. The Vampire was also replaced in the fighter role by other aircraft, such as the de Havilland Sea Venom, and later the Hawker Hunter. Although the Vampire's service came to an end, it remained a favorite among aviation enthusiasts. Some have been presented and are on display in museums worldwide, while others continue to fly in civilian hands at air shows. Its simple design and ease of maintenance have made it possible for many of these aircraft to remain airworthy, even to this day.
Well, that was one. Now, let's find, why don't we find the other one? Okay, so we got this one. This is one in a museum, so it's more geared towards kids, but it's still interesting to see the aircraft.
Hi, my name is Bob Schwarzenberger. I'm a volunteer at the Hangar Museum here in Calgary because I was in the Air Force Reserve 403 Squadron right here in this hangar in the 1950s. I like coming here because I have the opportunity to share my knowledge and skills that I learned in the Air Force, and also I love working with children, so I do the school tours. So I'm very involved and I love every minute of it. Today we want to talk about the Vampire jet aircraft, particularly the de Havilland DH-100 Mark III, the aircraft that we are standing beside. The Vampire began as an experimental aircraft. Its first flight was in 1943. So our Vampire jet is a very sleek and looking aircraft, and it's very fast.
Typical markings of
it actually flies
Royal
about
Canadian Air Force at the
546 miles an hour top speed. This aircraft has a dual tail, and that's what makes it so maneuverable. Now, there are some interesting things on the back end of the aircraft. The trim tab right here is very, very small compared to all other aircraft. So one on each pin and here. The other thing that students always ask us about is this pipe on the rudder. This is called a pitot tube, and it's the thing that indicates the speed of the aircraft. In comparison to other aircraft, the Vampire was a relatively straightforward aircraft employing only manually operated flight controls and no radar in comparison to later aircraft. The Vampire had a relatively disorganized cockpit. People ask what these holes are for in the wing. This is the air intake for the jet engine. So you have the same hole on both sides of the cockpit, and that's where the air flows into the engine. Now, on the front, down here, are the guns. And there are 4 guns on this aircraft, 2 on this side, 2 on the other. The Vampire jet had several firsts. It was the first aircraft to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. It was the first jet aircraft to land on an aircraft carrier called the HMS Ocean. It also set a world altitude record in 1946 of 59,500 feet.
In 1946, a single Vampire began operating on an evaluation basis in Canada at the Winter Experimental Establishment in Edmonton. This aircraft was selected as one of two type operational fighters for the RCAF and was first flown in Canada in 1948, where it went into service as a training aircraft at RCAF Station Trenton. Operating a total of 86 aircraft, the Vampire became the first jet fighter to enter Royal Canadian Air Force service in large numbers. The Vampire had the function of introducing Canadian fighter pilots not only to jet propulsion, but also to cockpit pressurization and the tricycle landing gear. It proved to be a very popular aircraft, being easy to fly. The pilots liked it. The Vampire served in the 400, 401, 402, 403, 411, 438, and 442 squadrons across Canada during the late 1950s. It was replaced, however, in RCAF service by the Sabre jet in the late 1950s.
Our aircraft was owned by Justice A. Milton Heritance of the Supreme Court of Canada. He flew this aircraft in the 403 Calgary Reserve Squadron, and later he purchased it as his personal aircraft, and it was donated to the museum. Now this aircraft was one of the last aircraft built out of composite wood and metal. The interesting thing about the Vampire is the name. When it was first built, they thought of naming it the Spider Crab, but it ended up being called the Vampire because it looks like a vampire.
Well, that was interesting. So now we're going to go on to model kits and information. Okay? Now, for models for the de Havilland Vampire Mark III, we get them in actually 3 scales. The 72nd scale, of course, you have the old frog kit. Now, Heller put out one that was fairly decent. Now, it has shown up in Airfix boxing, and I believe it's shown up also in the Revell boxing. Now, A Model puts out their own model, but I don't really know what the quality of that one is. But Special Hobbies does one. And it does come in Canadian marking. So it comes in the city of Vancouver, I believe, which is the famous vampire with the vampire bat motif on it. Now, in 148, we originally had the Hobbycraft kit. Now, that came out in 1993, I believe. And everybody was hailing it as, oh, we got one in 48 scale now, blah, blah, blah. And then it turned out the tail booms, there was some serious flaws in the kit. Especially, I believe, with the tail boom being, the fins were too small and the boom was too short, something like that. So that's been recently been replaced by the new Airfix model, which is a superior model from what I can see. It's a really excellent model, has built up into the nice aircraft. And I would recommend that one. The only other one in 48 scale is Classic Airframes, which isn't, well, let's put it this way. It will fall, for quality, it'll fall in between the Hobbycraft kit and the Airfix kit. So if you have one of those, it's quite buildable. It's just, you would have to do a little extra. Now, The only 1/32nd scale kit available in the Mark III is the Infinity Model Kits, which is a company of HPH models. Now this is mode injection, unlike the other kits that are resin, and it too comes with the City of Vancouver markings. I think the City of Vancouver was the only one that did a marking with any pizzazz, as you would say. So I guess that's about it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that video, and please remember to subscribe to my channel and punch that like button. You also can donate to my channel through my PayPal, which is on the main page of my channel, and you also can donate through Patreon. So, as always, every build is an adventure, so go make it awesome, and we'll see you again later, and you have a good day. Goodbye.